This is the first part of the review of Chapter 6, the muscular system. In this part, we will focus on its overall organization and functions, and we will then describe the anatomy of skeletal muscle. In the second part, we will talk about the physiology of muscle in more detail. There are three types of muscle tissue which are widely distributed. Muscle tissue is contractile and therefore is well suited for many functions which require generation of movement. This can include movement of fluids throughout your body, as well as the movement of skeletal elements at the articulations. Note that all the movements generated by the skeletal muscles are by way of pulling contractions, right? And muscles never push. Also note the first statement, muscle tissue is found in every organ. Now think of the skin, for example, and see if you can name the parts of it that would contain muscle tissue. Figure 6.1 shows the major skeletal muscles, as well as the actions they produce. We have roughly about 600 skeletal muscles. Many muscles act as synergistic muscles, that is, they work together during the same movement. Other muscles are antagonistic to other muscles because their respective movements oppose one another. Of the muscles shown in this diagram, the abdominal muscles are synergists, while the biceps brachii is an antagonist of the triceps brachii. Figure 6.2 shows how the muscles attach to bones via tendons, and how these points of attachment determine the type of movement muscles exert as they contract. These points of attachment are referred to as either an origin, if it is on the relative stationary bone, or an insertion if it occurs on the part of that moves towards the origin as the muscle contracts. Note that muscles can have more than one origin, or, although less frequently, more than one insertion as well. So let's look now at how a skeletal muscle organ is put together. Figure 6.3 diagrams the basic structure of a typical muscle. Muscles contain many muscle fibers, which is the same to mean a muscle cell. Groups of individual muscle fibers are then bundled into larger muscle fascicles. Please note that muscle fiber or cells can be very long and are multinucleated. These vary in length from a few millimeters to about 30 centimeters, or almost a foot long. As figure 6.4 shows, each multinucleated muscle fiber or cell is then packed with intracellular contractile elements called myofibrils, which are in turn composed of proteins, actin, and myosin. These proteins are arranged in aligned repeating units called sarcomeres, which give the skeletal muscle, and also cardiac muscle, its striated look. In the next slide, I will describe these sarcomeres in more detail. Figure 6.5 shows the basic structure of a myofibril. A myofibril is composed of bundles of thick and thin filaments. Actin makes up the thin filaments, while myosin makes up the thick filaments. The thick and thin filaments overlap each other and are arranged in contractile units called sarcomeres, introduced in the previous slide. The Z-lines are composed of other proteins that act as attachment points for the sarcomeres. We will see that muscle contraction is achieved by the sliding of the thick and thin filaments past each other, thus shortening the length of each sarcomere. In the second part of the review of this chapter, we will discuss in more detail how muscle contracts, but here I want to first introduce some of the basic processes involved. All skeletal muscles must first be activated by a nerve signal in a process we will call excitation. The excitation will then cause a series of events, culminating in the increase of calcium ions around the filaments of the sarcomeres. These series of steps we will call the excitation-contraction coupling. The calcium ions will then cause the thick and thin filaments to move past each other, causing the shortening of the sarcomeres, which will eventually result in the contraction of the muscle. Okay, this is the end of the first part of this review. In the second part, we will pick up where we left off and describe these processes in more detail.